A friend informed me that my wife was having a romantic dinner with another man at his restaurant. In that instant, my blood boiled, and I was left speechless. A whirlwind of emotions overtook me: betrayal, deceit, contempt. Everything we had built together, the years of trust. The moment she professed her love, while gazing into my eyes, shattered. That knowledge crushed whatever feelings I had for her. My immediate reaction was to confront her, but what would that achieve? I already knew the answer. The betrayal was plain as day. I could feel the bitterness of humiliation burning in my throat. So, I sent the message that felt inevitable. "Enjoy your dinner, it's over between us." I imagined her reaction: shock, panic. What could she possibly say now? But I didn't care. I wasn't going to listen to her excuses. I wanted her to experience the same raw, suffocating pain I was feeling at that moment. Because when I hit send, something inside me snapped, and there was no going back. Hours dragged on as I waited for some kind of response, a sign of remorse, a confession, or even denial, but nothing came. Her silence cut deeper with every passing minute, like a knife twisting in my chest. My mind began racing. How had I missed the signs? The night she came home late, claiming exhaustion. The dinners where she avoided my gaze, glued to her phone. It was all so clear now. How had I been so blind? Maybe I didn't want to see the truth. When the heart clings, it overlooks the obvious. Deep down, though, I always knew. A sense of urgency consumed me. I had to do something. I called her phone, again and again, but there was only silence. My imagination ran wild. Was she in his arms, laughing at me? Was he better than me? I needed to know. A cold, brief message wasn't enough. I needed to confront her face to face. I didn't sleep that night. Anxiety coursed through me. Every memory of us cutting deep like a blade. The promises, the plans, it all felt like a charade, a play where I was the last to discover I was being deceived. I paced back and forth, waiting for any kind of news, some response that never came. Maybe she was still with him. Perhaps. When morning came, she walked through the door, smiling as if nothing had happened. My eyes were fixed on her, searching for any hint of guilt. I bluntly asked, "Where were you?" She hesitated. There was no escape now. I already knew the truth. Her expression was hard to read. Was it confusion? Or was it shame? Then she spoke, but her explanation wasn't what I had expected. "It's not what you think," she said, the words echoing like a gunshot. Not what I thought. What else could it be? She continued, trying to justify herself, explaining that the man she was with wasn't who he seemed to be. Suddenly, doubt began to gnaw at my anger. "Do you think I'd do that to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. She looked so convincing, so certain she'd done nothing wrong. I wanted to believe her, to hold on to anything but my fears. But something still didn't sit right. Why lie? Why not say something from the start? As she kept talking, part of me wanted to believe her, to think it was all a misunderstanding. But then why the silence? Why act like everything was fine? I watched her closely, every word seeming rehearsed. She insisted that she was dealing with something important, something she couldn't share at the time. But what could be so serious, so secret, that it had to be hidden from me? "You're lying," I interrupted, cutting off her explanation. She stepped back, surprised. Maybe she didn't expect me to confront her so directly. That's when I saw it in her eyes. She was hiding something. There was more to the story than she was letting on. We both knew that. But what was it? Why meet another man at night in a fancy restaurant without telling me? I needed answers, but something held me back. She hadn't told me everything yet, something that could change everything. As the first light of dawn seeped through the bedroom window, casting a golden hue over the furniture, Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers tracing the crumpled sheets. His mind drifted through the details of what he once thought was a stable life. The house, a spacious home in a quiet California neighborhood, reflected the life he and Camila had built together. Every part of it bore their mark: the photos on the living room wall, the plants Camila adored in the garden, the books Lucas had stacked on the shelves. Each corner held a story, a piece of their marriage that once felt indestructible. Camila, with her calm demeanor and expressive eyes, had always been the center of Lucas's world. They had met in college while studying law, and their lives had become intertwined in a way that felt unbreakable. While Lucas pursued his legal career, Camila took a different route. Law was never her passion, and after a few years she shifted to managing a small art gallery in the city, which made her happy. Their early years were filled with simple joys, adventures, trips, intimate dinners. Their relationship seemed strong, built on mutual respect and a deep connection. But over time, routine quietly settled in, not abruptly, but gradually. Work and the demands of adulthood created invisible walls between them, and before they realized it, long conversations had turned into brief exchanges, and spontaneous affection became a distant memory. For the last few months, Lucas had sensed that something had shifted. Camila, always so present and open, now seemed distant. There were more nights when she came home late from the gallery, offering more reasons for work meetings or cultural events to which, for some reason, Lucas was never invited. He noticed subtle changes, things that hadn't existed before. Her phone was always on silent, placed face down on the table, and there was a constant sense that her mind was elsewhere, even when she was right beside him. However, Lucas was never one to confront issues directly. His trust in Camilla was unwavering, and he refused to let doubts or insecurities eat away at what he believed to be a stable relationship. Yet the sense of unease persisted. He watched her from a distance, afraid to ask, unwilling to hear the answer he dreaded. While Lucas was wrapped in these thoughts, Camilla was just a few feet away in the kitchen making coffee. Her movements were light, but her mind was miles away. She knew Lucas was watching her, sensing that something inside him was beginning to question the life they had built. At the same time, Camilla herself was carrying the burden of a decision she had not yet voiced. It wasn't that she had stopped loving Lucas, in fact. There were moments when she felt immense gratitude for the life they had created, but something else had taken root, a restlessness that had been growing within her, something she could no longer ignore. The gallery workdays were long and demanding, but it wasn't the workload that left her feeling drained. It was the sense that her life had somehow stalled. The dreams of her youth of exploring the world and constantly challenging herself had been replaced by a predictable routine. Even though she was surrounded by art and culture, something within Camilla felt dormant. She and Lucas rarely argued, which many of their friends admired, but for Camilla, the comfortable silence between them had started to feel like a wall. She missed something that Lucas couldn't offer, and this emptiness pushed her to seek answers elsewhere, away from the life they had built together. That morning, the silence between them was heavy. Lucas observed Camilla's back as she finished setting the coffee on the table. For a brief moment, he almost asked what was going through her mind, but as on so many other occasions, the words died before they reached his lips. He took a sip from his cup, thanking her with a faint smile. "I need to stop by the gallery earlier today," Camilla said, breaking the silence. "We have an important meeting about a new exhibition." Lucas nodded, not lifting his gaze from his cup. He had grown accustomed to these sudden obligations, but something about her posture bothered him this time. A twinge of frustration stirred within him, but as usual he swallowed his feelings and wished her a good day. Later that day at the office, Lucas found it impossible to concentrate. The words on the screen blurred as his mind drifted back to Camilla. He knew something wasn't right, but he couldn't quite grasp what it was. It felt like trying to hold water in his hands. The harder he tried, the more it slipped away. Just then, his phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made his stomach churn. It was a longtime friend, someone he didn't see often but trusted. The voice on the other end sounded unsure, almost as if the caller didn't want to deliver the news. "Man, I need to tell you something." The serious tone made Lucas's heart race. "I don't know how to say this, but I think you need to know. Last night I saw Camilla at the restaurant, but she wasn't alone." Lucas felt the ground fall away beneath him. For a moment the world around him went silent, and the only thing he could hear was the pounding of his heart. He struggled to process what his friend had said, but it was as though his mind refused to accept it. With who, he finally managed to ask, his voice trembling. "I saw her with another man. They were having dinner together." It seemed off. A cold wave of dread washed over Lucas, and anger began to simmer within him. Yet disbelief clung tightly. This couldn't be happening. Camilla, the woman he had spent his life with, shared dreams with. How could she do this? He ended the call abruptly, unable to bear hearing more. His hands trembled as he picked up his phone to send the message that would change everything. Each word he typed felt like a knife slicing through his emotions. "Enjoy dinner. It's over between us." Lucas pressed send, and in that moment, he felt a mix of relief and devastation. He knew that nothing would ever be the same after this message, but he also realized he couldn't continue living in uncertainty. On the other side, when Camilla received the message, a chill ran down her spine. She stared at her phone for long moments, unable to believe what she was reading. The weight of her world crumbling down hit her like a punch to the gut. Lucas sat frozen, staring at his phone as though the words on the screen could somehow make him feel better. The message hung there, filled with anger and pain, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. Camilla didn't respond, and that only fed the growing suspicion inside Lucas like a slow poison. He glanced around his office, trying to focus on anything but the ache in his chest, but it was futile. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the weight of the world had fallen onto his shoulders. Hours passed, yet nothing, not a call, not an attempt at an explanation, just an unbearable silence. Each passing minute of quiet was like another blow to everything he thought was real. Camilla's face flickered through his mind over and over, the smile he adored, the way she had seemed so present, and yet so distant in recent months. Now he understood why. The pain of realization left him feeling numb. When Lucas finally arrived home, Camilla's absence was a brutal reminder of the harsh reality he now faced. The house, once a warm and welcoming home, now felt like nothing more than an empty shell. Lucas's breathing grew heavier as he walked through the halls, still catching faint traces of her perfume lingering in the air. Every room, every item that belonged to her, felt like a personal attack. The oppressive silence in the house echoed in his mind. He collapsed onto the couch, desperately trying to block out the images his imagination was forming. He could picture her with another man, laughing with that same sparkle in her eyes he had always believed was reserved just for him. Then, a crushing question struck him: who was this man? Lucas didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the lack of answers. His mind raced, searching for clues, but he knew there was only one way to get answers. He had to confront her. At that moment, he heard the door slowly creak open. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, and he leapt to his feet, a mix of fury and anticipation filling him. Camilla stepped inside, moving cautiously, avoiding his gaze, as if she knew there was no way to avoid what was coming. She set her bag down without a word, and the silence between them became unbearable. Finally, Lucas broke it, his voice cold and measured, though his eyes blazed with rage. "Are you going to tell me what's going on? Or do you want to keep pretending everything's fine?" Camilla slowly raised her head, and Lucas saw the tension on her face, a blend of fear and guilt. She knew he was aware of the truth, and there was no more hiding it, but something seemed to stop her from speaking. "Lucas, it's not," she began, but the words caught in her throat. "It's not what you think." Lucas laughed, but it was a bitter, joyless laugh, filled with pain. "Not what I'm thinking," he repeated, sarcasm dripping from his voice. "Then what is it, Camilla? What do you think I'm supposed to believe when I see my wife with another man in a restaurant?" Camilla would Astona and I unable to meet his eyes. She seemed to be searching for something to say, anything to calm the storm brewing in Lucas's gaze, but no words came. Lucas couldn't wait for excuses. Who is he? The question came out sharp, filled with anger, but also laced with the raw pain that made him hesitate for a moment. He needed to know who was this man who had taken his wife. Camilla finally lifted her eyes to him, now clouded with regret, but no words escaped her lips. Her silence was an answer in itself. Lucas felt his blood boil. "I asked, who is he?" His voice rose, and Camilla instinctively stepped back. The fear in her eyes made him realize how close he was to losing control. "He's just a colleague," she said, her voice shaky, the weakness in it betraying her attempt to downplay the situation. "Someone from work." "Lucas, it's not what you're imagining, I swear. I know how it looks." But Lucas cut her off before she could finish. "Not what I'm imagining," he snapped, taking a step toward her. His voice was low, but thick with anger. "So you're saying that sneaking around and having dinner at night isn't what it seems? Don't treat me like a fool, Camilla." She opened her mouth to speak but faltered, as if realizing that any excuse she gave would only make things worse. The guilt was written all over her face, but there was something more. Something Lucas couldn't quite grasp, something she was still holding back. But at that moment, Lucas wasn't interested in secrets. How long? The question escaped before he could stop it, his voice breaking with sorrow. It was a question he never thought he would have to ask. Hearing those words come out of his own mouth made the gravity of the situation sink in. This wasn't just a fight between a couple, it was the collapse of everything he knew. Camilla hesitated, and her silence said more than any words could. "Lucas," she began, but he cut her off again. "How long?" he repeated, his voice filled with raw hurt, his eyes pleading for some explanation that could somehow make this nightmare make sense. But deep down, he knew there was no justification. "A few months," she whispered at last, the words hanging in the air like a sentence. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath him. Months! It wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a long, deliberate betrayal. Each moment from those months flashed through his mind, each one cutting like a knife. He felt foolish, blind for not seeing it sooner. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. Lucas didn't know what else to say. Part of him wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part of him was in shock. The life he had built with Camilla was crumbling before his eyes. Camilla took a small step toward him, as if to reach out, but Lucas recoiled. The touch that had once brought him comfort now felt like the deepest betrayal. "Lucas, I didn't want it to be this way," she said, her voice trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. "I swear I never wanted to hurt you." He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "You never wanted to hurt me," he echoed. "Then what do you think you did?" "Camilla," she said. "Nothing. I couldn't." She trailed off, and Lucas knew that anything said now would only add to the pain. He also knew there was no going back. He wanted to leave, to escape, but something kept him rooted to the spot. There was more to this story, he could feel it. Camilla wasn't telling him everything, and this betrayal felt like the beginning of something far bigger. Her final words still echoed in his mind. Months. The realization was a brutal blow, but Lucas sensed there was still more being kept from him, something significant. Camilla's hesitation and the uncertainty in her eyes were what tormented him most. The silence between them offered no solace, it only deepened Lucas's need for answers. He had to know why his world was falling apart. Camilla stepped back, as if the physical distance might shield her from what was about to come. Lucas stood frozen, his gaze locked on her, unblinking. He was no longer the man who trusted blindly, who believed in the strength of their marriage. Something inside him had changed, and that change made him a stranger to her. "Tell me the truth," Lucas demanded, his voice low but intense. "All of it. Don't hold anything back." Camilla swallowed, knowing the moment she had been dreading had finally come. There was no more running, no more hiding. Lucas's words were not a request but a command, and she knew she couldn't escape it. "The truth. Lucas," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just dinner like you think. Lucas closed his eyes for a brief second, trying to contain the anger that was bubbling up inside him once more. He wanted to stop her, but he needed to hear it all, even if it would destroy him. "I didn't want to hide this from you," she continued, her voice breaking. Camilla continued, her hands trembling. "I knew you suspected something," but she hesitated, her gaze locking onto his as if searching for an escape that wasn't there. "The dinner was about business, something I didn't know how to explain to you earlier. I was trying to fix a problem." Lucas's brow furrowed, confusion mingling with the pain that already consumed him. "Business," he repeated, the words sounding hollow. How could business have anything to do with the betrayal ripping their marriage apart? He took a step forward, crossing his arms as if bracing for a revelation he knew would hurt him even more. "What do you mean, business?" he asked, his voice strained, though his patience was on the verge of breaking. "Are you saying that the man—" Lucas paused, his voice faltering for a second before continuing, "the man you had dinner with, does he have anything to do with this?" Camilla nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Each word she spoke seemed heavier than the last. He does," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't understand. I know this seems like cheating, but I was trying to protect you." Lucas's heart sank. "Protect me?" The disbelief in his voice was unmistakable. How could someone who had betrayed him speak of protection? Shaking his head, he struggled to contain the storm of emotions inside him. "Stop dodging the truth, Camilla, and tell me everything now," he demanded, his voice echoing through the room. "What kind of business? Why were you meeting with another man for dinner? I want the truth, all of it." Camilla closed her eyes tightly as if the words she was about to say were too painful to utter. She knew this moment was pivotal, that there would be no return once the truth came out. She began, her voice shaking. "Lucas, I owe a lot of money. Much more than you know." Lucas stepped back as if struck. Debts. He had known things at the gallery weren't going well, but he had no idea the situation had gotten this bad. His mind raced, piecing together the implications. "Debts," he repeated, the disbelief palpable. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought I could fix it myself," she admitted, her voice faltering as she struggled for words. "I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to drag you into it. I believed I could handle it all before things got out of control." Lucas felt the weight of the revelation hit him hard. It wasn't the betrayal he had been expecting, but it was a different kind of treachery. It was a betrayal of trust, a betrayal of their partnership. She had made decisions without him, hidden things from him. "So all this time," he whispered, piecing it together, "you were trying to fix a financial crisis, and that's why you went to this man?" Camilla nodded, tears silently streaming down her face. She knew Lucas deserved the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. He's an investor. Lucas, I was desperate. I didn't know who else to turn to. The gallery was drowning, and I made bad choices. I took out loans, invested in things that didn't work out, and suddenly we owed more than we could pay. I knew if you found out, you'd try to fix everything, but I didn't want to put that burden on you." Lucas was torn between relief and agony. Relief that the betrayal he had feared might not be the one he imagined, but pain that she had still deceived him, lied to him, made choices without him. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "Why did you think I couldn't handle knowing?" "Because I felt like a failure," Camilla replied, her voice heavy with regret. "I didn't want you to see me as someone who couldn't handle her own mistakes. I wanted to be strong for you, for us, but everything spiraled out of control." Lucas ran his hands through his hair, trying to process what he had just learned. He had always been the type to face problems head-on, but now it was clear that Camilla hadn't trusted him enough to share her struggles. Part of him understood her fear, the desire to protect their marriage from financial strain, but the other part of him, the one that felt betrayed, couldn't accept the secrets she had kept. And this man, Lucas asked, still unsure of how to feel. What role does he play in all this? Camilla looked at him, and Lucas could see the truth in her eyes. She took a deep breath, knowing the next confession would be the hardest yet. "I was negotiating with him, trying to save the gallery," she revealed, her voice barely steady. "He said he could help me, but he wanted something in return." Lucas's anger flared again. He knew what she was about to say, but he needed to hear it out loud. "Something in return," he repeated, his voice cold. "What did he ask for, Camilla?" Camilla lowered her gaze, tears flowing faster now. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked under the weight of the confession. He He wanted me to go out with him, for it to be more than just business. Lucas stood motionless for a moment, her words echoing in his mind, shattering whatever remained of his trust. The betrayal wasn't just about another man, it was about so much more. In that instant, he realized everything he believed about their marriage had crumbled. The pain was overwhelming, as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Camilla's words played over and over in his mind. He wanted me to go out with him, for it to be more than business. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was about a series of lies, a web of secrets that he had unknowingly been caught in. His heart ached, and he found it hard to breathe under the weight of her confession. Lucas started, but the words got stuck in his throat, choked by the torrent of emotions. Did you consider it? He asked, his voice shaky with disbelief and anguish. He knew he had to hear the truth, even if it would completely shatter him. Camilla, now in tears, shook her head slowly, as if the simple motion could soften the impact of what she was about to reveal. She tried to speak, but the tears choked her. She nervously ran her hand through her hair, searching desperately for the right words. I was desperate. Lucas, I didn't know what to do. The gallery was falling apart, and I just wanted to save everything we've worked for. I thought I could convince him another way, that it wouldn't have to come to this. A surge of anger coursed through Lucas, and he clenched his jaw, trying to hold back the urge to scream. He inhaled deeply, but nothing could quell the storm brewing inside him. Did you think, he repeated, his voice growing colder, did you think you could maybe convince him another way? Camilla, you went to dinner with him, accepted his terms, and now you're standing here telling me you were trying to save our life? What kind of salvation is this? Camilla recoiled under the weight of Lucas's fury. The regret she felt was crushing, but she knew there was no undoing what had been done. There was no excuse that could erase the choices she had made. She began, her voice trembling. I never did anything, Lucas, I swear. It never got that far. She struggled to finish the sentence, her voice breaking. I was scared. I thought I could control the situation, but it spiraled out of my hands. Lucas let out a bitter laugh, filled with anguish. He rubbed his face as though trying to wake up from a nightmare. Control, he repeated, incredulity evident in his tone. What kind of control did you think you had, Camilla? You put yourself in that situation, and now you want me to believe you were doing it all for us. Camilla approached him cautiously, her eyes red from crying, and reached out with a shaking hand toward him. Please, Lucas, she pleaded. I was trying to protect you, to protect us. I know I made a mistake. I should have told you everything from the start, but I was so afraid of losing you, afraid you wouldn't forgive me. Lucas stepped back, recoiling from her touch, as if the thought of physical contact was unbearable. Lose me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Camilla, you've already lost me. Don't you understand? By hiding this from me, by lying and keeping me in the dark while you made deals behind my back, you've lost me. This isn't a marriage. This isn't trust. Camilla sobbed quietly, aware that her words couldn't reach him. She saw the devastation in his eyes and knew she had caused it. She wished more than anything that she could go back and make different choices. But now she was left with the wreckage of what she had done. Lucas, she started again, her voice filled with remorse, but he cut her off sharply. Don't, he interrupted, his gaze hardening, each word she spoke feeling like another wound to his heart. Don't call me. You deceived me, Camilla. Maybe you didn't sleep with him, but what you did is enough to destroy me. The silence that followed was agonizing. Lucas turned his back to her, his thoughts spinning uncontrollably. He needed space. He needed to breathe, but the air in the room felt too thick, too heavy. The marriage he had once believed to be solid now seemed like a fragile illusion, something he barely recognized anymore. Lucas, please, Camilla's voice broke the quiet again, filled with desperation. Please, what he snapped, turning around swiftly, his voice brimming with anger held back. What do you want from me? For me to just forget all of this? To pretend it never happened? You've betrayed me in every way that matters, Camilla, and now you expect me to forgive you. Camilla dropped her head, unable to meet his gaze. She knew asking for forgiveness was futile, but she couldn't help it. Despair swelled inside her. I never wanted to hurt you, Lucas, she said softly. I know I failed you, but I love you. I've always loved you. I was just trying. I just wanted to. She couldn't finish, as each word seemed too painful to utter. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, trying to find clarity amid the chaos of emotions swirling inside him. He was hurt, betrayed, and exhausted, tired of fighting a situation that seemed unsolvable. Love, he repeated bitterly. If this is what love is, I don't want it anymore. I don't even know what it means. Camilla's silent sobs filled the room, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. She knew, without a doubt, that she had lost Lucas, and Lucas, for his part, understood that no matter how much he tried, he couldn't undo what had been done. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. Lucas stepped away again, his mind still a mess of confusion. He didn't know what to do or how to react. All he knew was that the love he thought he had was gone. There was no more trust, no more truth, just lies and secrets that had torn everything apart. He glanced at Camilla once more, but she felt distant now, no longer the woman he had married, but a stranger he barely recognized. Without another word, Lucas grabbed his car keys and left the house. He needed air, needed to escape the weight of her betrayal that pressed down on him like a suffocating force. As the door closed behind him, Camilla crumbled to the floor, overwhelmed by regret. She knew there was no turning back now. As Lucas drove through the night, the sound of the engine was the only noise that cut through the emptiness he felt inside. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he needed to get as far away as possible from Camilla, from the betrayal, from everything. What came next he had no idea, but for now all he wanted was to forget. The engine roared as Lucas sped down the dark streets, the road ahead lit only by the headlights of his car. Everything around him seemed to move in slow motion as his mind whirled, lost between anger, disappointment, and deep sadness. Every mile took him farther from the house he had called home, farther from Camilla the woman, who was now just a shadow of the person he thought he knew. The silence inside the car was overwhelming, and Lucas struggled to cope with the thoughts that were piling up in his head. He didn't know where he was headed, there was no destination in sight. He knew he needed space, some time to breathe, away from everything that suffocated him. The last moments at home had been overwhelming. The image of Camilla crying, pleading for forgiveness, was still vivid in his mind. Yet forgiveness seemed unreachable at that point. How could he forgive her after all this? How could he accept that the woman he trusted most, the person he had shared his life with, had concealed so much? The betrayal, even if it wasn't physical, was still a betrayal of everything they had built together. The car came to an abrupt halt on a deserted stretch of road. Lucas turned off the engine but remained seated, gripping the steering wheel, his breath heavy. His chest tightened with the intensity of his anger and pain, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead, though his thoughts were miles away, lost in a haze of confusion. It was hard to believe everything had unraveled so quickly. In recent years, Lucas had noticed small changes in Camilla, but he never imagined things would spiral to this extent. She had drifted away from him, and he, absorbed in work, hadn't realized how much she had been struggling alone. Guilt began to mingle with the pain, but he quickly pushed aside any notion that could justify her actions. Nothing excused such deep secrets. He tried to focus, to think about his next steps. Part of him wanted to confront her again, to go back and demand more answers, but deep down he knew it wouldn't change anything. Camilla had already said everything that needed to be said. She had gotten involved with another man, and even though she claimed it had only been meetings behind closed doors, she had made promises to him, promises in exchange for saving herself, and perhaps their marriage. But what was the real cost of those promises? And how could they move forward after such a painful truth? Lucas unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out of the car, breathing in the cold night air. He needed to distance himself from the pain, if only for a moment, to feel the wind against his face, something to remind him that this was still real, despite everything. He walked a few steps along the empty road, weighed down by his own thoughts. The path ahead seemed uncertain, and doubt was the only thing he could be sure of. Why had Camilla let it come to this? Lucas had always believed that if they faced problems, they would confront them together. He never imagined she would carry such a heavy burden on her own, hiding so much from him, until it was too late. Now, everything was on the brink of collapse. He wondered if there was any way to save their marriage, or if it had been doomed the moment Camilla decided to go down that road. Memories of their past started to flood back. They had been happy, hadn't they? When they first met, their connection was instant. Lucas remembered the sparkle in her eyes when they talked about the future, about the plans they would build together. Camilla was always so full of life, and that was one of the things he loved most about her. But over time, something had changed. The brightness he had admired so much had dimmed until it disappeared entirely. He blamed himself, at least in part. Maybe he had pulled away. Maybe he hadn't been present enough. But did that excuse what she did? Could loneliness and fear truly justify betraying the trust of the one you loved most? This question gnawed at him, leaving him stuck at an emotional crossroads. The phone in Lucas's pocket vibrated, breaking his train of thought. He hesitated for a moment before pulling it out and looking at the screen. Camilla's name flashed, and he stood there, staring at the phone as though it were something foreign, something he no longer knew how to handle. She had already sent several messages, and now she was calling, likely desperate to repair the damage. Lucas ignored the call. He didn't want to hear anything from her right now. Whatever she said, no matter how regretful, couldn't undo what had been revealed. He needed time to process, to figure out how he truly felt. And maybe, deep down, he knew he wasn't ready to forgive, if forgiveness was even possible. As Lucas walked back to the car, he began to question his own reactions. Was it even possible to forgive someone who had hidden so much, who had made decisions affecting both of their lives without consulting him? The moral dilemma before him was complex. He knew that the love he felt for Camila wouldn't vanish overnight, but he also knew that love was now stained by a distrust that would be difficult to overcome. Sitting back in the driver's seat, Lucas stared at the empty road ahead, reflecting on how they had reached this point. Every choice, every decision that had led them to this moment seemed magnified, and although he didn't want to admit it, he knew he bore some responsibility for the distance that had grown between them. But how much responsibility did one person's actions justify the mistakes of the other? Could he truly forgive the fact that, in her most crucial moment, Camila had turned to another man in search of a solution? And more importantly, could he live with the emotional betrayal, even if it wasn't physical? Lucas sat in the car for a few more minutes, his mind racing with these questions. The thought of going home and facing Camila again felt unbearable, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. There was nowhere else to run. Deep down, he realized that despite all the pain, he still loved her, and that left him with the hardest question of all: would love be enough to overcome what had happened? Lucas eventually parked the car in front of the house, but stayed inside for a while, looking at the familiar facade that now felt so different. The darkness outside contrasted with the light shining through the windows, and he knew Camila was inside, waiting for him, perhaps still crying, perhaps searching for the right words to explain what she had done. The thought of walking through that door was almost unbearable. How could he return to being the man he was before? How could he look at Camila without remembering every lie, every secret she had kept? But eventually, Lucas knew he would have to face reality. He took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked slowly toward the door, each step feeling like a heavier burden on his shoulders. As he stepped inside, the first thing to greet him was the overwhelming silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall filled the space, its steady rhythm amplifying the feeling that time itself had come to a halt. Camila sat on the couch, her eyes swollen and red from crying, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if she were holding on to the last fragments of her world. When she saw Lucas enter, she immediately stood up but remained quiet. The tension between them was heavy, loaded with unspoken words and emotions on the verge of spilling over. Lucas lingered by the door, unsure how to begin. He didn't want to fight. He was exhausted from trying to understand, from seeking answers that might never come. The love he still felt for Camila was buried beneath layers of pain and doubt, but he couldn't tell if it would be enough to heal the wounds. "I love you." Camila finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "I know everything I did was a horrible mistake, and I realize you might never forgive me, but I need you to know this: I still love you. I've always loved you." Her words hit Lucas harder than he had anticipated. Love, she still loved him. But did the love he had nurtured for her over all those years stand a chance of surviving what had happened? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "Camila, I don't know if love is enough right now," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "What you did, it wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the gallery. You betrayed me in a way that I'm not sure I can get past. It's not just about trusting you again, it's about trusting myself. Trusting that I'll ever be able to move beyond this." Camila began crying again, though this time she didn't try to move closer. She understood that Lucas's words came from a place deep inside, from someone who had been torn apart and didn't know if he could piece himself back together. "I wanted to protect you," she said through her sobs. "I wanted to handle everything on my own because I thought you didn't need that weight on your shoulders. But I'm the one who brought the heaviest burden to our marriage. I'm the one who ruined it all." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process her words. He knew there was truth in what she was saying. He knew Camila had truly believed she was doing what was best, but knowing that didn't make things any easier. Maybe, he started, taking a deep breath before continuing, "maybe the problem is that we both drifted apart. I buried myself in work, and you got lost in your worries, and now we're here. Broken. But Camila, I don't know how to fix this." The silence returned to the room as Lucas finally sank onto the couch, utterly drained. Camila stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do, before she quietly sat next to him, keeping a respectful distance as though afraid to break whatever fragile hope remained between them. Lucas glanced at her, feeling a mixture of sorrow and affection. He still saw the woman he loved, but now she was marked by the scars of everything they had been through. "I've been thinking a lot while I was gone," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "I thought about us, about who we used to be and who we've become. I think we're both at fault. I wasn't there like I should have been. I didn't see how much you were struggling, but you..." He paused, his throat tightening as he fought to continue. "You made decisions that destroyed the trust we had." Camila nodded slowly, her tears still falling. "I know," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I know what I did is unforgivable. I don't expect you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever, but I just want you to know I would do anything to make this right. Anything. Lucas sighed. Even with all the pain, love still lingered somewhere inside him. But was that love enough? He didn't know. The future seemed unclear, and the path to healing felt long and uncertain. I don't know if we can fix this, Camila, he admitted, his tone softer now, but I think I'm willing to try. I'm not saying it'll be easy, or that we'll ever go back to what we were, but maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward. Camila looked at him in disbelief, a flicker of hope lighting up her tear-filled eyes. Do you really think we can, she asked, her voice tentative. Lucas offered a small smile, though it wasn't a joyful one, it was a smile of resignation, of acceptance of their reality. I don't know, he replied honestly, but I think it's worth trying. We owe it to ourselves to try. They sat in silence for a while longer, side by side but separated by a chasm that might never be fully bridged. Yet in that moment there was a glimmer of a chance for them to rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, nothing would ever be the same again, but there was something left to hold on to. Perhaps it was love. Perhaps it was simply the desire not to let everything fall apart. Either way, the future stretched out before them, uncertain but with a faint possibility of redemption. Now that you've reached the conclusion of the story, share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful tales like this one. Remember, this channel does not condone any form of infidelity. Stories like this one are meant to reflect on the choices we make and how they shape our lives.